Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dina Mansour. I'm the executive director of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center, and I'm honored to welcome you tonight to another Mansfield Dialogue on populism and democracy with a focus in Europe. But as we learned this morning when I had a speaker on KGVO on the same topic, it's very easy to extrapolate to what we're experiencing in our country today. The Mansfield Center, as many of you know, was founded by an act of Congress more than 40 years ago to honor ethics in public affairs and global engagement. So what we're focusing on today, more generally than just right now, are programs that support freedom, love of Constitution, country over party, a lot of critical things that people across ideologies can support. So our speaker this evening is the ideal combination of everything that fits within the Mansfield legacy of looking at issues of freedom, but also looking at them from an international lens. We're honored to partner on this program tonight with the Franke Global Leadership Initiative. This is a phenomenal program here at the University of Montana that internationalizes the student experience, not necessarily just in terms of engaging with international countries and populations, but looking at great challenges that are relevant across the world. So I will introduce their director, Gillian Glaze, to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Dina. Appreciate it. And thank you to the Mansfield Center for hosting this evening's lecture. We appreciate everything that the center does to bring these kinds of events to campus and to the Missoula community. As Dina said, my name is Gillian Glaze, and I'm the director of the Franke Global Leadership Initiative. Tonight, I have the distinct honor and pleasure of introducing my friend and colleague, Dr. Martin Nekola. I first met Martin in September of 2021 when he came to Montana for a series of lectures. The Montana Historical Society put us in touch, and we invited him here to UM's campus to give a lecture on Eastern European exiles during the Cold War through the UM Humanities Institute. His talk was the first hybrid event that we did through the Humanities Institute, as we'd spent about a year and a half hosting lectures and panels online. So we were really excited to get back to doing events in person, and I have many happy memories of us, masks on, enjoying an in-person event that day. And now here we are 4 years later, and Martin has returned to UM mask-free. I am so excited to welcome him here to deliver his Mansfield Dialogue lecture entitled Populism, Democracy, and the Future of Europe. Dr. Nekola received his doctorate in political science at the Charles University in Prague, Czech Republic. His research is focused on non-democratic regimes, the era of communism, and Czech communities abroad, especially in the US. From time to time, he participates in election observation missions organized by the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. He also is the Czechoslovak Talks Project Coordinator and a member of the Association for Slavic, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies. In terms of scholarly production, he is unparalleled. He is the author of more than 400 articles and has published 30 books. And he told me recently that he publishes about 4 books annually, which to me is astonishing in so many ways. Each year, he travels throughout the Czech Republic, Europe, and the rest of the world, delivering talks to all kinds of audiences. And tonight, we are lucky enough to host him here at U of M through the Mansfield Dialogue lecture. Please join me in welcoming Martin.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you very much for having me. It's indeed a great pleasure to be back to Montana. For the first time, I was here exactly 4 years ago. I came for a conference in Butte, and then I gave lectures in Helena, in Bozeman, in Missoula. And I simply fell in love with your beautiful state. I am also a proud member of All 50 States Club. I visited all 50 states, including all 50 state capitals, and the one in Helena, the Capitol building, is one of my favorite. So I was really excited to come back. Thank you for having me. As mentioned, I'm a historian and a political scientist, born and living in Prague, the Czech Republic. By the way, have you been to Prague? Yes, good. Did you like it? Of course. I usually come twice or 3 times a year to the United States to do my research, to give lectures, to meet the local Czechs, because for the past 10, maybe 15 years, I'm a historian, doing research on the Czech communities abroad. I'm also the manager of the project called the Czechoslovak Talks. If you look at our website, which is the czechoslovaktalks.com/en for the English language mutation, you'll find out that we simply collect inspiring, interesting life stories of the Czechs abroad. My country had a very interesting history, at least of the 20th century. Many people left the country because of the war, because of the Nazi occupation, because of the Soviet occupation, and they ended up in various countries, in the US, in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, etc., etc. And I think that these stories of real people who had to start from scratch with no language skills, with no money, with no connections, are a great source of inspiration and motivation for the students, for the younger generations. So I kind of feel the need and obligation to present these stories, to make them public. And back home in the Czech Republic or Czechia, you can use both names. Both were officially approved by the United Nations. Just please don't make the very same mistake as many American journalists who call my country Chechnya, which is a bit different country elsewhere, okay? So Czechia, I think that really we need to share these interesting life stories. So back in the Czech Republic, I am also very active in terms of lectures for high school students. Almost every day I have a lecture, and I'm simply, this is a never-ending story for me. It's a strange combination of a hobby, job, passion, curse, love, never-ending mission, you name it. However, today I'm not going to talk to you as a historian, but rather as a political scientist and election observer. As you have probably noticed, we currently live in very turbulent times. I'm sure that my colleagues, historians, political scientists, sociologists, will be very excited about them in the future. However, it's not such fun for us today. The world is changing rapidly, right? The old certainties and values have apparently disappeared. Again, I come from Prague, from the very heart of Europe, from one of the relatively new member states of the European Union. We joined it in May 2004, so 21 years ago. So allow me today to talk a bit about the development in my country in the last few years, about the rise of populism in the European Union, and naturally about the war in Ukraine. And in general, to share the Czech or Central European perspective on what is currently happening. Speaking of the European Union as the community of 27 countries, we probably agree that there has been a general internal tension lasting for more than a decade. There were many issues that even deepened the misunderstanding between the member states. It was the bankruptcy of Greece back in 2009. It was the so-called European refugee crisis. It was the Brexit in 2016. And all of it was a clear warning for the European Union elites that the Union needed immediate reforms. The Czech Republic, the middle-sized country, just a bit larger than Ireland or South Carolina, with almost 11 million people, has always been, thanks to its strategic position, a meeting point, a center of business and culture, and a place where the West met the East. Thus, we can see my country as a small laboratory, where the latest trends and the mood of the population copy what is actually happening in the European Union in general. If we use the language of computer game players, the Czech Republic is like a demo version of a real game being played beyond its borders. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, my country had one of the lowest unemployment rates in Europe. Its economy was growing, the quality of life was very high, but still, we Czechs were labeled troublemakers and an interior opposition in the European Union because of our lukewarm approach towards further integration of the Union and cooperation with our partners and colleagues on various issues. Again, the Czech Republic, with its economy strongly tied to the larger German economy, and with most of its foreign trade with other member countries, has been a stable member of the EU since 2004, as I said, and there is no real alternative for us than a deepening integration into the Union. However, the phenomenon known as Euroscepticism has dramatically increased. What does this term actually mean? Euroscepticism entered political discourse in mid-1990s, but initially it was almost exclusively used as an expression which focused on all kinds of opposition, criticism, and negative attitudes towards the European Union and the progress of European integration. In many cases, Euroscepticism was just subjective and vague in meaning, lacking any proper framework, and it attracted primarily less educated and less politically knowledgeable individuals. In the Czech Republic, specifically, this has changed in recent years. Public opinion about the European Union is now playing a major role. Political scientists usually distinguish between hard and soft Euroscepticism. Hard Euroscepticism refers to a complete rejection of EU membership, hand in hand with the rejection of NATO, whereas soft Eurosceptics support limited EU membership, but they are very skeptical and critical of various aspects of the integration, such as the cross-border movement of people, adoption of a common currency, euro. By the way, the Czech Republic still keeps its own currency, which is the Czech koruna, or giving up powers and responsibilities of the local/state government in favor of a supranational leadership in Brussels, meaning the European Commission, European Parliament, and other European institutions. We can say that the current situation in the Czech Republic in many ways reflects the past. While they are not directly under the rule of another power, many Czechs feel dominated by larger EU nations. This is especially true of Germany, as the Czechs already have negative historical associations with Germanic people who dominate EU decision-making now. Let me remind you that the Czech lands were under direct German/Austrian rule for more than 300 years. And many Czechs now see their national identity as having been defined from the outside. And the criticisms of the European Union bring up this historical threat to our national sovereignty and the three historical periods in which the Czech lands were under the rule of a foreign power, and the Czechs as a nation had to make concessions to survive. I'm talking about three historical periods. That means the long period under the Habsburg dynasty or under the Austrian Empire, of which we were part between 1620 and 1918, then the Nazi occupation during the World War II, and the Soviet supremacy between 1948 and 1989, while after August 1968 it was a direct military occupation. So this historical experience is reflected in many criticisms of the European Union that depict the Czech Republic as a pawn controlled by the West, by the foreigners. Thus, EU encroachment on domestic issues is seen by many compatriots, by many Czechs, as a clear evidence of a foreign rule. There is a feeling of lost sovereignty as a result of EU membership, but by its very definition, membership means that any member state will simply have to give up certain aspects of self-governance in order to fully participate. And the Eurosceptics are able to tap into these nationalistic sentiments in order to gain support for their cause, whether or not the loss of sovereignty is real or just imagined. There are actually many factors that may influence the growth of Euroscepticism, but one of the most significant is the expansion of the EU's authority into domestic matters. Critics have said that there is a democratic deficit in decision-making or in governing of the European Union. They say that the decision-making processes in Brussels are too distant, too strange, too complicated. They say that the EU leaders are not responsible for the decisions to the voters and the public in the member states. It's the EU bureaucracy, inefficiency, disrespect towards the opinions, feelings, and needs of the people in the member states, and the fact that the European law overrides the Czech constitution and the Czech laws in many cases, that has been criticized by most of the political parties across the political scene for the past 2 decades. But Brexit made Euroscepticism and populism a mainstream and a serious burning topic. So it's clear that the European Union needs some fresh air and reforms. I truly believe that the Czech Republic should be in the middle of these changes for the better and the building of a new EU vision, because it's a win-win solution for everyone. We can show that we are creative, active, respectful of our partners, and not merely the ones who criticize only, who don't care, who sit in the back, let the others to do the work and shout only when we don't like something. Some EU critics among Czech politicians even called for a similar referendum, preferably leading to a Czexit. But I think it's highly unlikely because there is, as I said, no real alternative for us. And actually the Czechs benefit greatly from the European single market and various structural and investment funds of the European Union. We have drawn billions of euros, tens of billions of euros from these arrangements in the past 21 years of our membership so that we could build our highways and roads, protect the environment, renovate cities, modernize industry, or allow our students to get university degrees from prestigious Western European universities. And yet, more and more people are calling for Czechit. But why? I believe that we have to look at this trend from a broader European perspective. And we see that the rejection of the EU values is again closely tied to populism. Political parties lacking any ideological foundation and using populist appeals emerged in Central and Eastern European countries in general in late 1990s. These parties back then did not adopt a radical ideology until 2010, 2012. And populism was not a prominent element of Czech politics, meaning mostly parties at the periphery of the political spectrum used some kind of populist rhetoric. Also, compared to other countries in the region, the Czech Republic had one of the most stable and relatively closed party systems. And it was characterized by almost exclusive unidimensional competition, meaning there was one major party in the right, there was a Civic Democratic Party, and one major leftist party, that was a Social Democratic Party. But then, as I said, 2010, 2011, the new generation of voters grew up, and these seem to be characterized by lower level of identification with traditional left-wing, centrist, or right-wing parties, and they rather show the tendency to be attracted by simplified populist promises, and therefore to be linked with new protest or anti-establishment parties and movements. These political entities usually divide society into two antagonist groups, the pure people versus the corrupt elites. They argue that politics should be an expression of the general will of the people. They emphasize a real or imaginary crisis or threat. They claim to speak for the good and honest people, and they attack the out-of-touch elites. Furthermore, it is very problematic to identify these parties and movements on the left-right political spectrum because they combine elements from both ends of the spectrum. And they're using populist language, of course. And there is also a very important role of charismatic leaders or rhetorical features such as tabloid style, dramatization, and the use of social media to spread fake news and disinformation. If we take a look at populism from the European perspective now, we see that the populists have established themselves as a powerful political force in many countries. In France, Marine Le Pen, right, National Rally. Party for Freedom of Geert Wilders in Netherlands. Sometimes these parties have even become integral members of coalition governments, like in Italy, which now has a Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, from the Brothers of Italy party. But she's a very interesting case because after taking the power, the party surprisingly left the radical rhetorics and became moderate and pragmatic. In some cases, these parties even won the election, but they didn't have enough support to be able to build the government, like the Freedom Party in Austria. Alternative for Germany is exponentially growing, and it actually became the second largest and strongest party in the German parliament. And we can easily continue. The ultra-conservative party Law and Justice in Poland, which has systematically eroded democratic institutions, democratic media, or independent media and the judiciary over the past decade, was ousted from power in 2023, but remains very strong, and its candidate, Karol Nawrocki, won the presidential election in August of this year. Fidesz party, right, in Hungary, of Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has been in charge since 2010. Slovakia currently also has a populist coalition government. So, as I say, we can see this as a general European problem. In the Czech Republic, we also have our representative of the populist wave. It's a billionaire Andrej Babiš, the seventh wealthiest man in the country. He's actually a very interesting case. The red cap inspiration is obvious. It says strong Czechia. He was born in Slovakia. In 1990s, he founded a conglomerate called Agrofert that operates in the fields such as agriculture, logistics, energy, chemical industry. And today, some 230 companies are covered by the umbrella trademark Agrofert, worth of more than $4 billion US. Kind of a nice family company, right? Babiš decided to enter the politics in 2011, claiming that the traditional Czech parties did not do a good job in ruling the country. So he established a new political party, or better to say, anti-establishment movement called ANO. ANO, it means yes in Czech, but it's also the abbreviation of the actions of dissatisfied citizens. He mainly criticized the corruption affairs that were, in his opinion, much more frequent and worse than in the Western countries. And after he stepped into the political arena, many political scientists used the term Berlusconization of the politics, named after the Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, who also established his own party. He owned the biggest media in Italy and basically dominated public space. So Babiš followed his steps. He bought two largest daily periodicals. He owned the radio station, TV channel, and has been using them very effectively to influence the public opinion. His marketing team prepared a very smart face-to-face campaign in the streets, and sometimes it looked like Babiš was everywhere. He handed out donuts at subway stations in Prague. He was visiting regions with mobile booth with fried chicken. He was meeting people almost every day and presented promises of higher wages, higher pensions, and basically benefits for everyone, for various groups of the population. We have to admit that he really devoted an incredible amount of time, money, and energy to the campaign, and it was worth to him because ANO movement won the election in October 2017, and he became our prime minister for next 4 years. ANO movement was defeated in the following parliamentary elections in October 2021, so Babiš was ousted from power, but still he kept very strong supporter base. ANO was the strongest opposition party. Babiš himself ran for the president in 2023. He made it to the second round, where he was beaten by Petr Pavel, retired general of the Czech army, known abroad mostly for his long career in NATO, where he also chaired its military committee. But during the very long presidential campaign, the criticism of the European Union and the war in Ukraine belonged to the most frequently discussed topics, and it was Andrej Babiš who brought new unflattering dimension of populist rhetoric into the Czech politics and public space, because he simply sensed correctly it stirred up emotions in the population. We had the parliamentary elections just 2 weeks ago, and ANO movement won again. During the campaign, its politicians and candidates were trying to convince the public with almost unlimited promises to vote for them, while the previous coalition government was warning that if ANO won and Babiš became prime minister again, much would be at stake, including our membership in the European Union, NATO, and our pro-Western orientation. The fact is that ANO movement had a long-term support of about 31% of voters, mostly seniors, less educated people in the regions, and in the reality, the party won with the election with 34.5% of the votes. So we'll see what the future will be. The thing is that in our proportional electoral system, much more important is who actually has greater coalition potential. In other words, who will be able to negotiate with other parties and gain the majority in the Chamber of Deputies with 200 seats. Again, it was very interesting to observe the campaign materials of ANO, which we can undoubtedly call a populist party. They usually contained statements about opposing the orders coming from Brussels, protecting the Czech interests and Czech consumers, Czech taxpayers, limiting support for Ukraine, etc., etc. So it's obvious that in the foreign policy, ANO, as the probably ruling party after the election, will be more isolationist, less cooperative, and we can say less pro-European. Best friends of Andrej Babiš among the foreign statesmen are Viktor Orbán and Robert Fico in Slovakia, so that explains a lot. Hungary and Slovakia, another two countries in Central Europe that have to deal with the increasing populism, more or less connected with negativism, focused either on corruption, the heritage of communism, and dissatisfaction with the developments after its fall, after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the transition to democracy. Again, the EU factor plays a role. It's the national interests versus the Brussels directives, because, you know, I have to emphasize that people from the countries from the former Soviet bloc are actually very sensitive about pressure from outside. I've already talked about the feeling of German dominance many Czechs share, but there is another similar comparison. For more than 40 years, following the end of World War II, the communist regimes in Europe, including the one in Czechoslovakia, received strategic decisions from Moscow alone. Official propaganda talked about the Soviets as liberators, protectors, greatest friends, equal partners, but in fact, the countries behind the Iron Curtain were nothing more than satellites and subordinated vassals of the Soviet Union. We used to call these regimes people's democracies, but they were far from any participation or involvement of their citizens in decision-making. And in late 1980s, the rulers were completely distant from their citizens. And the whole communist regime was just a rotten castle falling apart day by day. And so the current situation and the current abyss of misunderstanding between Brussels, meaning the European leaders, and the individual member countries and their citizens sometimes remind the old times before the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989. The political scientists and sociologists warn that there is a widespread mood in the society that the old values and guarantees are gone, that the government is more of an obstacle to achieving prosperity than a facilitator, that mainstream media are not telling the truth, and therefore it's necessary to look for alternative sources of information. Simply put, many people and more people believe that there is some dark conspiracy, some deep state behind all of us, and populist parties, movements, and politicians are naturally trying to take advantage of it in order to gain political support. This narrative of omnipresent conspiracy and threat was also to be seen during the refugee crisis in the past few years, including the current Ukrainian one. And we can clearly see some patterns. Populist politicians in many European countries warn against horror consequences of accepting refugees. They claim that they are the only ones who could protect the people, our way of life, our living standards, national interests, despite some nefarious interests of the dark forces hiding in the shades. The war in Ukraine that naturally was another shining moment for of the European populists. Let's move back to February 2022. We barely had time to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and we had to face the consequences of the war. For your information, my country, with less than 11 million people, has granted protection to more than 500,000 of people from Ukraine, and also provided the war refugees with health insurance, access to our labor market with almost no restrictions, humanitarian allowance, social services, childcare, etc., etc. Because again, Czechs themselves having unfortunate experience with the Soviet occupation, we were very helpful at the beginning of the conflict. Naturally, the longer the war lasts, the more people are dissatisfied with the amount of money spent and the level of care for refugees. And again, you can hear usual narratives that the Ukrainians are stealing our jobs, that the Czech taxpayers and consumers are being impoverished. The truth is that the Ukrainians saved our economy after the pandemic. Most of them work. They helped to reduce the inflation, which was even reaching like 20% back in 2021, and they are, an indisputable benefit to our economy and to our society. However, in the public space, many disinformation and even obvious lies have spread, which are very difficult to refute and set things straight. You probably know the famous quote by Joseph Goebbels, right, the chief propagandist of the Third Reich, who said that a lie repeated 1,000 times becomes the truth. And exactly that is currently happening. Populists began to spread the narrative, stressing worsening macroeconomic conditions, especially the high inflation, and they say that we are going to suffer, we are going to freeze during the winter, we are going to lose money and living standards only due to our support of Ukraine. They present a very simplified solution. The war is just a minor regional conflict between Russia and Ukraine. We, as the European Union, should not intervene. Weapon supplies only mean more prolongation and extension of the conflict. And they say that the very best solution would be to force Ukraine to give up part of its territory, thus satisfy Russia, which will withdraw its troops, the war will be over and everyone will be happy again. They say they are the only ones calling for peace, but in fact, if you examine further their communication with the public and consent of their appeals and messages, it's full of anti-West, anti-European, even anti-American and xenophobic narratives, depicting Vladimir Putin and his regime as guardians of traditional values of Christianity, defending them from Western decline and decadence. Not a single word about the war crimes, about bombed cities, about mass graves, kidnapping of children, and other atrocities committed by the Russian army. So the war in Ukraine shows us every day that we, as Europe and the European Union, are in the middle of real information and cybernetic warfare. Because the Kremlin is simply not giving up on repeated attempts to destabilize European Union and also other European countries. Just 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was the election in Moldova, right? And again, there are clear. There were cases of bribes to the voters and various disinformation campaigns in the media and in the social media. Therefore, I believe that the European Union is about to play a much stronger and much more autonomous role in ensuring its own safety through strengthening the local defense industry, coordinating armies, and investing in new technologies, for example. Before the war in Ukraine, the European Union was mostly seen as a civilian/economic power and project, relying on NATO for defense. So this is also changing step by step. Another phenomenon we see in Europe is energy diversification and economic transformation. The European Union cut reliance on Russian gas, oil, and coal much faster than expected. For example, the Czech Republic depended by 97% on Russian gas back in 2022, and now it's less than 2% only. So we were basically able to change plans, strategies, and policies planned for decades within a few months after the war started. Also sanctions against Russia. That's another phenomenon, another important thing. There's been altogether 18 sanction packages so far, and now they are planning a 19th one, which should focus on Russian diplomats in the European Union. Of course, the sanctions and energy shifts hurt European industry to some extent, but also fostered innovation and investment in alternatives, which is naturally good for the future. Speaking of the future, a few states are on the waiting list to become EU members. It's Ukraine, of course, and then the Balkan countries like Bosnia, Montenegro, and Albania. But to be frank, I'm not sure the enlargement agenda is relevant for the next few years. At first, we need institutional reforms of the Union and stronger mechanisms against obstruction. You have probably heard that Hungary very often blocks or delays sanctions, which makes the decision-making on European level quite complicated. Because according to the rules now, the unanimous decisions of all members, meaning of all 27 members, are required, and there are voices calling for a qualified majority instead, meaning two conditions would need to be met. The first condition is 55% of member states vote in favor. In practice, that means 15 out of 27 countries. And the second condition, the proposal is supported by member states representing at least 65% of the total EU population. Also, the rise of populism in the European Union will be a decisive factor shaping the Union's future in the near term. Again, a summary of the drivers of populism right now is the economic pressures, meaning inflation, high energy costs, and economic slowdown hit working and middle class voters hard. Migration and identity, renewed migration flows, cultural debates, and security fears also fuel the nationalistic and populist rhetoric. War in Ukraine, energy transition, sanctions, and defense spending create discontent in some societies. Distrust of elites, meaning Brussels. Again, populists frame EU institutions as distant and undemocratic. And social media dynamics, disinformation, and direct communication help populist leaders bypass traditional media. Saying all that, I see four near future scenarios. Number one, populist surge in EU elections. The populist parties and candidates gain strong foothold in the European Parliament, influencing agendas on migration and climate, for example. Number two, fragmented Europe. We have more governments with populist parties. It would lead to slower decision-making and weaker common foreign policy of the European Union. Number three, managed populism, meaning that the populists govern but adapt pragmatically, like the party in Italy, allowing EU functioning with more nationalistic flavor. And number four is the systematic clash if populists dominate more large and important states in the European Union, speaking about France, Poland, Italy, and Germany. In that case, EU could face existential reform pressures. So I believe that even my country will continue to kind of maneuver between further European integration and sovereignty. As I said, most of the Czech governments in the past 21 years tended to resist further transfer of competencies to Brussels, speaking mostly of taxation and migration policy, while they were supporting integration in areas like the single market, the defense industry, energy, and digitization. I believe that even for the future, economy will remain a closely watched sector because over 80% of Czech exports go to EU countries. And as I say, we are very closely tied with the German economy. some experts even call us the 17th Bundesland, right? Part of German economic space. However, the Green Deal and the climate policies of the EU challenge Czech industry, automotive, heavy manufacturing, energy. So, I think the Czech Republic can position itself as a bridge, again, between more federalist countries, France and Germany still, and more sovereignty-focused ones, like Poland or Hungary. And but I think that the Czech Republic can still maintain credibility as a pragmatic pro-Western actor. So, from the Central European perspective and from the Czech perspective, the struggle for freedom and democracy has never been easy. But if we stick together, we will win, I am sure of it. At the very end, let me use the famous quote by our first democratic president, Václav Havel, who was elected after 41 years of communist regime in 1989. He said, "Truth and love must prevail over lies and hatred." Thank you very much for your attention.
It's not on. What? Sorry. Okay. Oh, great. Okay. So we're going to open it up to questions. We'll invite people in the online audience to post them in the chat box. And I'm happy to run the microphone around, so please raise your hand if you have a question.
Thank you, Dr. Nekola. Can you elaborate more on the role you think social media plays in spreading populist ideas?
A major one. Again, we had the election just in the past few weeks, and sometimes it looked like that you simply cannot hide and you cannot run. We were overwhelmed by messages, by appeals, by Facebook and Instagram and X posts on everything. And the thing is that we have many different elections. We have the local municipal elections, we have the Senate elections, we have the parliamentary elections, presidential elections, European elections, regional elections. So, we are in the middle of a never-ending campaign, and sometimes it's really tough, So I'm really glad that I'm able to leave twice or 3 times a year, because otherwise you see posters and billboards and information brochures and leaflets of the parties in the mailbox, So we are, and that's part of the problem, that people are so upset and tired of being under the constant pressure from the parties and from the politicians. So everyone was a bit afraid of the turnout of the parliament, but at the end of the day, it was very high. It was more than 68%, which is a great news for democracy, right? Even the first-time voters, people who are 18, 19 years old, they wanted to be involved. They do care what is happening. So that's a good news. Worst news is that the Populist Party won with, large support. As I said, 35.4%. That's a lot for Anno movement, meaning it's 80 seats out of 200. So it's not the majority, but they'll be able probably to build the coalition government to have the majority. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your excellent talk. It puts a lot of things in perspective. Could you elaborate on the fact especially that happened, as you know, in Central Europe, which went from the collapse of the Soviet communism, which was a tragic experiment that we still suffer from. So there was this sudden hope that Western capitalism, Europe, consumer society, the free market will bring freedom and a certain high level of affluence, which worked up to a point. But then, as you know, capitalism is tough, right? There's competition, there's outsourcing. So a lot of people didn't feel that they participated, they got the benefit that they should. So there was a disillusion. The same thing happened in the US too. So could you mention that? So what do you do when you cannot go back to communism and the free market has problem? So you go back to, you regress onto your state, right? You have a type of national capitalism with tariffs, protectionism, nationalism, etc. So that's happening all over the place. And, but what do you think that a populist Europe would mean if there's a populist majority in Strasbourg and Brussels?
Yeah, thank you. It's an excellent question. You know, it's a clear fact that the communist regime, and 41 years of communist regime, had a devastating effect on, let's say, nation soul. And it's still visible today. Not for me, but for the generation of my parents and grandparents, communism is still kind of hidden inside their heads and brains, and they have memories on those times. And some people feel that they were left behind. There are many underdeveloped, poor regions, even 36 years after the Velvet Revolution, even after 21 years of our EU membership. When, as I said, a lot of money was pumped and sent to the Czech Republic. But and again, you can saw that in the maps showing the election results. Pro-Western, pro-European parties won in large cities and in bigger towns. But most of the support to Babiš and to Ano movement came from the regions, came from the borderlands. You probably know a bit about the history of Czech lands that were inhabited by the Czechs and by the Germans. They shared the same space for 1,000 years. And after World War II, we took care of that problem, right? We expelled 3.5 million Germans within a few months. And again, it's still visible today. These regions were left behind. And today, if you look at them, the highest unemployment rates are there. Most of the social problems, alcoholism, drug-addicted people live in these regions. So again, they are waiting for something. They are waiting for I call them false saviors, right? So when they look at the billboards and posters with unlimited promises, we'll give you more money, we'll give you benefits, we'll give you everything, they still believe that. And that's a problem. But at the end of the day, they realize that nothing would happen, nothing would really change their lives, or the more burning topic and question is, who is going to pay for that? Who is going to pay for all the promises, That's my problem, and that's the problem of my kids, right? Because in next 20, 30 years, it'll be a real problem because the people in the working age, the number of the people in the working age will be pretty much the same as the number of the seniors, right? So the pension system, healthcare, education, that all need immediate reforms, at least in the Czech Republic. But the populists, they don't care, They just want to be in charge now, and they don't look for the future. They just want the people to believe them now. And I think it's a general image in many countries, It's a funny thing. There is another populist party called SPD, which is the direct democracy party. And during the campaign, they were using the very same posters, just a bit adjusted, with the same messages and appeals as the Vox party in Spain, So even the populists kind of coordinate their election campaigns and their appeals and the narratives or what they want to say. So we can see a clear pattern, that even these parties are talking to each other and are getting ready that they will take over Europe one day, maybe. Hopefully it will not happen, but it's the case still on the table, right?
Okay, and I do need to apologize to our online audience. Apparently the chat function is disabled, so I encourage you to email Dr. Nekola directly.
Yes.
But we will continue to take questions from the audience.
Thank you, Dr. Nekola. When the Czech government criminalizes the support of communism as equal to the support of Nazism, as I believe we saw earlier this year. I could be mistaken.
No.
Do you think that is warranted because of the shared suppression of both regimes, or do you feel that could possibly lead to the isolation of fellow anti-populist parties on the left?
I think it's a wise decision. It's a brand new thing. It happened only a few months ago. But I think it's a bit late. This should have been done back in 1990s, just after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Now, okay, not too many people vote for the Communist Party now, because ANO movement actually, took most of their voters. So yeah, it's illegal to promote communist ideology and to use communist symbols like hammer and cycle and the red star and stuff like that. But most of the traditional hard-wing communists, they are gone now anyway. So, but it was a great thing to do, definitely.
Doctor, first of all, thank you very much for coming. It was really a pleasure to hear your speech and to hear the lecture. It was very, very interesting. I'm curious if you think that there's sort of a tendency in the West to believe that good ideas will naturally defeat what we consider to be bad ideas. And as a result of that, if you think that the dominance of liberalism in the late 20th century has rendered modern Western democracies somewhat complacent and maybe lazy to defend themselves against populism.
Yeah, you're definitely right. And let me go back to Václav Havel, to our first president. You know that he was dramatic and right at first. And if you read some of his speeches and articles and papers, like The Power of the Powerless, published or written back in 1980s, I think, it's so important now, He passed away in 2011, 14 years ago, a long time ago. But, his ideas and his thoughts are so important right now. And they're coming back, so because he warned against the populist, leaders, against the rise of populism, against the decline of liberal democracy and Western Europe. So please do read Havel, and you'll see a lot of is currently happening globally, in Europe, in the US. I recently visited Canada. Last year I spent a month in Australia. The same thing, the same pattern. Populist leaders are on rise. The old guarantees are gone. The people don't believe in the system anymore. So please do read Havel, and maybe you'll find some cures and some solutions to the crisis right now.
I guess I'm kind of confused because where I grew up, populism meant workers and unions and farmers and miners. In fact, the first presidential campaign I worked in was for a prairie populist from South Dakota, as some people here probably remember. So how is it that the billionaires managed to take over the idea of populism?
In Babiš's case, people believed, well, he's a rich man, he's a successful man, he built a successful company. He doesn't need to steal any more money, right? That was the premise. But still, he has been involved in some corruption scandals, and he's under investigation, and he was convicted. But as you can see in the US, that's really not, it doesn't prevent, being from running and from being elected. I don't know. Everyone, the first president, the founder of independent Czechoslovak Republic back in 1918, at the very end of World War I, was Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, who was a professor, who was intellectual. He was like a founder of a nation, and we still have Masaryk's statues and posters and images. So everyone was kind of saying, well, Masaryk, that's our symbol, that's the symbol of democracy, that's the symbol of wisdom. But now the people don't vote for intellectuals. They don't vote for philosophers anymore. They want someone who looks like them, That's why Babiš's campaign was so smart and so brilliant, because he was standing at the subway stations, handing out donuts and sausages. He took selfies with all the people. He said hello to everyone. So the people said, well, look at him. He's a multi-billionaire, and still he can find the time to talk to us and to meet us in the squares and streets. So he's one of us. That's the guy I would like to sit with in a pub to have a beer with. And that's it, you know. That was brilliant. His marketing team was, you know, they should win the Nobel Prize for that.
Thank you, Dr. Nekola, for coming to Missoula, Montana. I appreciate your being here with us. And I'm curious about education and the future generations. What sorts of education is available for them in your country in regards to freedom of thought and having critical thinking skills?
Since my country is a civilized country, we'll probably say socialist country, the education and healthcare is for free. Sorry. So yeah, we have free or cheap schools. Many students go to the universities. And again, thanks to the European Union, they can study wherever they want. If a Czech student decides to study in France, Sweden, Germany, Ireland, he can or she can do it right away. So that's a great benefit for the future, right? That's the investment for the future. Coming back to my first slide and the project I'm running, the Czechoslovak Talks, the message of my lectures is always, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter who your parents are. It doesn't matter that you have the money. It doesn't matter that you grew up in a small town in the borderlands. It's just about you, about your energy, about your ability to work hard, about you know, your bright ideas and visions and goals. So I tell them, just don't be lazy. You know, step out of your social bubble, travel. You know, talk to other people. Today there is this Erasmus program for European, including Czech high school students. You can spend the whole school year abroad. So that's very important, you know. When I talk to the teenagers, to 18, 19 years old kids, they think that they have the world in these stupid boxes, you know. They think that if they watch a 5-minute video of someone, some YouTuber, influencer walking on the Fifth Avenue in New York, that they were there as well. I say, no, that's not the same. You need to be there in person. You need to touch it. You need to smell it. You need to taste it. You need to talk to the local people. So please do explore the world. The same I keep telling to American students, right? Not so many of them are used to travel outside of the US. So I tell them, don't worry, we have flushing toilets, we have electricity. There's a civilization in Europe, in the Czech Republic, that's not Siberia, so please do come to the Czech Republic. And they are surprised, you know, they are excited to come back. Well, speaking of Prague, that's cheap beer, right, naturally. By the way, as for the consumption of beer per capita, the Czechs are #1 in the world. We even defeated the Germans, and that always counts, right? I don't know if it's something we should be really proud of, but so please, if you like beer, then come to the Czech Republic, and you'll see that you're in the middle of Europe, you know. Within 3 hours, you can get to Berlin. Within 4 hours, you can be in Vienna. You're just in the middle. So that's the solution, you know, for the kids. And going back to your question about the education, it's not about sitting in the school and writing essays and studying something. It's about the integration and communication with the people around the world.
All right, well, thanks to our amazing colleagues here, we do have the live chat back up for the virtual viewers, so I'm going to read one of these questions. What institutional defenses have worked best against populism in post-communist Europe, and are there lessons here for Western democracies?
Again, it's the universities, schools, NGOs, but they are under attack right now, as in the United States, you know. So we have to protect them, and we have to make sure that they'll stay a significant and inseparable part of civil society, of the checks and balances. That's the only solution I can offer.
Okay, I'll go to the next question. This is from Dr. Lily Scott, who was our featured speaker on this topic on KGVO this morning. She says, thank you for a wonderful talk, Dr. Nekola. I ask this question, well, I am wondering if you could respond to Ivan Krastev's argument that the rise of populism is not a result of the failure of the democratization process in Central and Eastern Europe, but of the success of the democratization process in Central and Eastern Europe. Given that populism has risen remarkably in the liberal democratic West in recent years, do you see features of liberal democracy that engender political forms, like populism, that challenge democracy?
Yeah. Again, going back to history, we need to remember what was happening before the fall of the Iron Curtain. You know, we need to talk to our parents and our grandparents. You know, the stories of waiting hours in front of the grocery stores to get one banana or toilet paper or something. That's like, you know, completely unimaginable for the students now. What? There was no toilet paper? How is it possible? Ah, that's not true. You're making fun of us, Grandpa. So, you know, again, the people simply forgot how the life was 30, 35 years ago. Again, the quality of life now is the very best we have ever had. And, you know, but it can, the destruction can come very easily. That's why it's so dangerous, and that's why it's so important. You know, I don't know what happened to the people. I don't know. I was born in 1982, so I was like 6, 7 years old, first grader when the Velvet Revolution came and when the Berlin Wall came down, and I still have memories on Prague, which is now one of the most beautiful cities in Europe, as kind of hostile, unfriendly city. Everything was kind of covered by dust. Everything was under construction. You know, so even I'm not that old, but I see the difference. You know, I see how the city and the whole country has developed step by step in the past 30 years. So I grew up in Czechoslovakia, right? There was a split of the country in 1993. So now we are two countries, the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic. The Slovaks are our closest brothers. And for the generation of my kids, I have a daughter who is 13. She doesn't speak any Slovak. She doesn't understand any Slovak, language. So this is also kind of a change. And the Slovaks went a bit different way in the past 30 years, and they were also kind of more populist parties and populist politicians had a much stronger support than the ones in the Czech Republic in the past 30 years. So that's also very significant change that even our brothers, people who were living with us in one country for 80 years, are now in a bit different position, on a bit different pole. So again, we need to learn from our history because it's coming back every time.
I actually have two questions. Don't people attribute some of the boom in the economy to the membership in the EU? I mean, after all, after the fall of the Soviet occupation and control, the economy really rebounded. It had to be due some part to the EU, wasn't it? Don't people feel that way?
Yeah, the economic transformation, that was one of the most, burning issues in early 1990s. Many people lost their money, but I think it was necessary, this like radical change from one day when everything was nationalized, everything was under socialist economy. There were some sharks, as we call them. There were even the Czechs living in the US and in Great Britain, the immigrants who came right after the revolution, and they knew how the private sector works, so they immediately took advantage of it, and they stole billions of Czech crowns. That's true, but I think this happened also in other European countries, post-Soviet countries. There was just disease, the illness at the beginning of freedom. Yeah, that's what happened.
Dr. Nekola, thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Would you mind sharing your thoughts or your feelings about some Americans with well-known names who have engaged with populists and third parties in the European Union?
You mean which third parties, like supporting?
Steve Bannon, or even on up to a vice president and president, they have sometimes pulled for one party or another, or made statements that would seem to show affinity with one party over another. Do you have any feelings about that?
The same with Elon Musk, who supported the Alternative for Germany, right?
And Elon Musk, Steve Bannon, perhaps, and interested in what's happening in Eastern Europe for a while. I mean, it's a free flow of ideas, but do you have any feelings about how it's worked out?
What can I say? Because they see and they feel that they have friends and equal partners and counterparts in European countries, and they just support them. If there is an election, they support them, and they expect that they'll be, elected, and they will be in charge, and that will be much easier to communicate and to coordinate the actions on a global level, right? But money talks, right? So if Musk, for example, supports some parties by a lot of money, by millions and billions, he expects some, payback, some gratitude. But it didn't work out with Alternative for Germany, right? Because it didn't win the election. But in next 2 years, that might be the case. I mean, it's very complicated to talk about the European or the Czech political system, because it's a bit different. Even the terms like right wing, left wing, moderate, radical, it means a bit different things than here in the US. But from what I know, the connection of politics and business is much stronger in the US. This nepotism and networks and hidden friendships and alliances are much more frequent here in the United States. The European or Czech politicians wouldn't dare, to accept openly support from some big businessmen because it would be too obvious, and too fishy. So that's how it works here in the US. The same with gerrymandering and other things which are not, imaginable in Europe.
I guess it's my turn. Thank you for coming. My question is about, in the US, Christian nationalism, religious extremism, is so much a part of what appears to, it just seems the glue that holds together and divides us. So if you can speak to that. Were you able to hear that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, at first let me tell you that the Czechs are probably the most agnostic nation in Europe. Although we are surrounded by the Poles, by the Slovaks, by the Austrians, by the Bavarians, all religious people. We simply don't care. There is a strong tradition of Protestantism, the so-called Hussite movement, following the thoughts of a religious thinker and priest Jan Hus, who was burned by the Catholic Church back in 1415. And since then, it's in the people. This tradition of Protestantism, this tradition of opposition against the Catholic Church. Another thing, as I said, we are part of Austrian-Hungarian Empire for more than 300 years, and the Catholic Church was considered the most obedient ally to the Habsburgs, right, to our oppressors, to the ones who caused all the problems to the Czech nation. So maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't care so much. The religious parties, well, there's a Christian Democratic Party, but it gained only like 3% of the votes. So this Christian radicalism and influence of Catholic Church in the politics and in public affairs, that's not so obvious in the Czech Republic. By the way, if you want to learn and to understand the Czech mood and the Czech population and the Czech spirit, please read the novel called The Švejk, Good Soldier Švejk, by Jaroslav Hašek, and that really explains a lot. It was written back in 1920s. It's about a Czech soldier who needs to fight in the Austrian army during the World War I. At the first sight, he looks, competent and obedient and serving his Austrian or German masters. But when they turn turn out, he starts to make fun of them. He starts to, he's trying to cheat the system. He's trying to find his own ways, how to get the money and how to take advantage of everyone else. So this is kind of typical for the Czechs. That worked under the German occupation, that worked under the Soviet occupation. That also works now when we are kind of dominated by the EU nations. The Czechs are very smart and very, very flexible in finding their own way. So that's us. And by the way, I do research on the Czech migration to the United States between 1848. That was the year of when the revolutions took place in Prague, Budapest, Vienna, and other places in Austrian Empire, until the outbreak of World War I in 1914, there were more than 350,000 Czechs who left the country and moved to the United States. Nowadays, as I said, it's 11 million people living in the Czech Republic, and there are another 2.5 million Czechs or people of Czech background living abroad. Out of that 2.5 million, it's 1,700,000 living in the United States, here. People of Czech background, of Czech origin, of Czech roots. And this was also typical, this typical Czech spirit among the Czechs in the United States. They brought it from the old country. So it's very interesting. I think it's a phenomenon. It's part of our modern history. But the thing is that I'm probably the only researcher who is working on this topic in the long term. But I think it's so exciting, to see how the separated Czech communities developed in big cities, New York, Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, or in the farming communities, in the smaller towns and settlements in Midwest, in Texas, in South Dakota, in Montana, by the way, because that's so exciting. The Czechs still kept their traditions, their language, their history, the knowledge of how the life looked like in the old country. They became Americans. They kind of swam in the melting pot. They wanted to fulfill their American dream. They wanted to become successful Americans, but still part of the Czech history, of the Czech traditions, still remained in their brains and in their minds.
Okay, we still have a lot of questions, but unfortunately it's growing late, so we're going to go to our last question.
Sorry.
Thank you. I don't know how I earned that honor.
Oh.
But two questions, comments. The obvious success of populism in the US now with the new administration which clearly actually gets inspiration from Orban in Hungary and specifically...
And everyone else.
Yeah, and everybody else. What impact does that have on populism in Europe, as you see it? Second thing, I was really interested in your comments about populists being anti the EU, but hasn't the early manifestation of populism in the UK in the form of Brexit and the complete shambles that was made it clear that actually leaving the EU isn't a very sensible option?
Well, again, the situation of the United Kingdom was a bit, unique. It still had the Commonwealth. It still had the colonial past. So it could have, built on the on these relations and connections. Speaking of the countries in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe, you know that Croatia joined the Union, Bulgaria, Romania. We don't see any other, possibility, any other option. So, as I said, Brexit was a clear warning, and many other countries or populist parties in many countries were asking for a similar referendum in Netherlands, in France, in the Czech Republic. But I think it would be, so dangerous to move on this. One of the parties that was running in our election was also asking for the referendums, to rewrite the constitution, to have the referendums in that on all major issues, including the membership of NATO and EU. And that's so dangerous, because it's all about the campaigning. It's all about the promotion. It's all about how you work with this topic. If Babiš and his party, as the most influential party, says, well, the NATO is not as good as we imagined after all, so let's decide, we'll vote, we'll have this referendum. Should we remain member state of NATO or not? I don't know what could have happened. You know, I don't know how the results would look like. So it's so dangerous to play with this card. And speaking of the inspiration by Trump, yeah, definitely, that's so obvious. And even more dangerous is that it's not just Trump as a person and the language he's using, but it's also about everything what has happened in the past 4 years. You know, he was convicted and he was, you know, he had serious issues, but at the end of the day, nothing of that seems to matter, right? So that's the inspiration for Orban and for other populist leaders. They say, oh, okay, if Trump, you know, at the end of the day, if Trump came back home with no problem, he's not in jail, then that might happen to us as well. So that's the thing. Now we are living in a vortex. You know, I'm pretty sure that the historians will write many books and school materials about that, but now it's quite an adventure and quite a challenging period and era to live in. So fingers crossed, good luck. Maybe I can come next year or in 2 years from now, and we'll see how the situation will look like both in Europe and in the United States. Have a great evening. Thank you.